So recently, I was having a conversation with a woman who felt that I should probably be super happy during this period of Valentine's because, it's the season, love is in the air, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, besides the fact that it's supposedly the season of love, I honestly don't feel shit about it. But considering the season, I will bring out some aspects of love in the episode. And as I'm doing all of that, I'll also see if I can address some aspects to do with change and men knowing how to let go of shit. Or at least some men knowing how to let go of shit. But before I can get into any of that, I want to start by addressing something that is highly beneficial to the men, at least the men of Kenya, and that is the fact that the government recently registered the men's conference as an actual initiative. Like, the government of Kenya listened to the men who felt that the 14th of February, aka Valentine's, was just another pointless holiday and decided to replace that shit with an initiative that has been ratified by the government and is recognized under the constitution. And to be honest, normally I talk shit about the government and I'm not the biggest fan, but this might actually be the start of me changing my mind on how I feel about the government.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
That's a stack of bull. Not the whole men's conference thing. My whole thought process on, maybe I'll start loving the government. Nah, like there's a lot that we need to be critical about the government for. It's just that we got the men's conference and, that's a pretty good thing. But still, it's actually a thing. Like, kid you the hell not. It was something that actually happened over the past weekend, around the 10th of Feb. So I'm going to read some bits of the article, not the entire thing. So it says, and I quote, "The government has fully registered the popular Men's Conference, an initiative held every February the 14th as a counter to Valentine's Day after years of it being ridiculed as a non-serious gathering of men. This was announced on Saturday, February the 10th by its chairman and Citizen TV senior political reporter Stephen Leto, who termed the full registration as required by the Constitution of Kenya as a milestone. This makes the gathering recognized in the laws of Kenya. 1 year, we held our inaugural conference in the Carnivore. The Men's Conference Group has made a milestone and is now fully registered as required by our laws and the Constitution," Leto announced. In summary, at the conference, men are taught how not to simp. A simp is slang for a man who is desperate for the attention and affection of a woman and is ready to do anything for her. According to Leto, the theme of this year's men's conference will be championing the well-being of the boy child, with the main focus being road safety for boda boda riders, with the climax of it being the launch of a year-long road safety campaign on Wednesday, February the 14th. The campaign will be launched based on the realization that more men are victims of road carnage, with an annual report by the National Transport and Safety Authority indicating that 3,609 people lost their lives in road accidents between January and October of 2023. Alright, so let me just end quote it here. Mostly because I find it a little bit funny, because like earlier on there was the whole, this is how not to simp, and then now they're talking about road safety and boda boda riders. But still, even with that contradiction, I'm actually pretty happy that it's been set up. I'm also happy about this whole initiative of like road safety campaigns and shit. Because, it's very pro-men, of course, and the fact that it's actually addressing an actual issue that affects men does give it a lot more credibility, and it means that the initiative is actually a good thing, not just for men, but for people in general. Like, I'm not saying this for certain, but if this is how feminism started, I can totally understand why a bunch of women were championing this thing for years to come. Like, this shit already starts out and it's good from the jump. Although then again, the whole simping thing, I think, is something that still should be talked about, because there's still a lot of guys that are simping. Not that it should be the main focus all the time, but considering that there's more and more young boys that are turning into men after, they cross the age of 18, they're recognized as adults and shit, I believe that, passing down that information through things like the men's conference can actually be pretty good. Although then again, passing of that information is something that I also do in this podcast, which now that I think about it, I probably should have started with a much more, energized tone. Maybe with a little bit more of an instrumental behind me, kind of like when I usually start by saying, "Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective," as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who should have attended the men's conference, especially considering that I've been called a simp many times before, and some of those times people were actually right about it. He's a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has started on such a good note for guys, and the most unfortunate part about it is that I'm about to kill that note throughout the entire episode. Because in as much as I do speak for guys, I'm about to turn the tables on this one, and there's no way that I can stop this from happening. But all in all, regardless of who you are and you're listening to this podcast, thank you so much for listening. This is the Friday episode, meaning that I usually go online and pull up a couple of tweets that people usually write, and I usually break them down. And it's also the episode where I don't do as much creative input into it, because you can send in the tweets that you'd like me to discuss, and it's a pretty simple drill. Almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal X handle, and I will take it from there and I'll handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot or a screen grab, or it ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is @TheBreaktime_podcast on IG and @TheBreaktime_podcast on Facebook. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of tweets that I need to get into, of which some of them just have so much that I need to break down. But before I can get into any of them, I first need to talk about something that I found to be particularly odd, which happened sometime over the course of last weekend. Now, there was a report that I saw where a man, I don't want to say threw himself, but fell off of a building in Kasarani. And the whole story around his falling was because he was allegedly dumped by his girlfriend, and he kind of wanted to end himself. Now, the reason why I'm saying that, he probably fell, not necessarily through himself, is because when I saw the video itself, it looked like he kind of was trying to double back and not fall. But either way, the guy kind of ended up in that situation by his own choosing. And it's something that I feel needs to be talked about, because it's something that we don't talk about a lot, and yet it's something that happens quite a bit to a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys who have put themselves in near fatal conditions, sometimes people even offing themselves, all because they were dumped by a girlfriend, or they had some issues with their girlfriend or their wife, and they feel like, there's nothing left to life. And thing is, if I was having this discussion sometime before 2018, or sometime before mid 2018, because I guess that's around the time when the whole mental health thing became a thing, like, I'd have probably been like, this guy's a pussy. Oh, why the hell do pussy ass niggas do this shit to themselves? Come on, toughen the fuck up. Oh, a shorty left you. You should be happy. You get to go back to the single world. You can hit whatever pussy you want and not feel jack shit. And I'd probably be on my why the hell do you care type shit, with that entire thing. Now, if I was dealing with this between 2018 and 2019, I'd say, there's a lot of guys that go through depression or go through some sort of mental health issue, and they should seek help and they should talk to someone. And, hopefully they will find some person that is willing to listen to them and help them through, because this could be something of a mental health issue that definitely needs to be sorted with. But now that it's 2024 and I've gone through a bunch of shit, honestly, it's never that serious. And I know there's someone who's over there who's like, Denver, you're supposed to be speaking for guys and you're supposed to understand guy feelings. So why the hell are you saying this shit? And yes, I should be speaking for the guys because I do understand guy feelings. And yes, I am the guy that pretty much begins the podcast all the time by saying that I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective. And I've said more than once about how this podcast is largely about me talking about how guys feel and what guys go through, so that guys can feel like there's someone who understands them, and women can finally understand the kind of shit that guys go through. And yes, I have said all of that shit, but guess what? I'm the person who is here busy telling you that it's never that serious. And the reason I am telling you this is because, one, I have been in a situation where I have loved and I have gotten dumped despite being loved, and also because I understand that sometimes we need a little bit of tough love in our lives as men. And the reason I'm saying all of this is I have seen men who have been dumped by their wives when they're at their lowest, when they needed support the most, they have been left by people and they have picked themselves up and they have flourished. I am speaking because I have seen those guys and I have been through whatever it is that some of these guys who end up trying to off themselves because they've been dumped have gone through. So I can probably say that it is never that serious because there is so much more to life. Like, the unfortunate reality is, as men, when we truly fall in love, we love unconditionally. And it's something that, in as much as can be a really good strength for us, tends to be a pretty big weakness. And the worst part about it is, for us as men, even though we love unconditionally, we're loved with conditions most of the time. Actually, almost all of the time. From the moment you become a working class man, you're a grown civilian, you are loved with conditions. And as unfortunate as that is, we need to accept the fact that even though we are loved with conditions, yet we love unconditionally, that we're going to go through a bunch of shit. And because those conditions may not suit the person that we're with and they choose to leave us, it does not mean that it is the end of life. And even though it feels like it is, I will tell you for a fact, most of that shit is just your emotions. It's not even that bad. And if you feel like it's that bad and you feel like, it's not just your emotions, it's literally everything just looks bleak. I am here to tell you, as someone who's gone through some sort of emotional pain of that sort, that there are ways out of that shit. And I would be more than happy to tell you exactly what to do to get yourself out of that situation. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't particularly have like an exact timeline, but the very first thing that I'll tell you to do as a guy, accept that she's gone. Accept that you've been left, accept that you've been dumped, accept that she's gone. The moment you do that, you are going to feel like shit. And I am not going to sugarcoat that thing. You will feel like shit for a while after you've been dumped. What I will tell you is, do not try to get rid of that feeling by chasing a bottle or trying to chase some pussy elsewhere or doing weed or doing anything to kind of drown out your sorrows. Feel that shit to the absolute fucking core, because in as much as you feel like shit at that point in time, what has automatically started happening is the recovery process. You have started healing and you will continue to heal provided you accept that she is gone. Whenever you get thoughts about it, you accept that she is gone and whatever happened was great, but she is gone and it is time for you to move on. Eventually, at some point, you will wake up in the morning and you will not think of her. You will move along with your life. You will be happier and you will have the opportunity to move on and be with someone else, or choose to remain single and fuck around for all I care. But at the end of the day, you will feel better. And I kid you the hell not, you follow this process, it might take days, it might take weeks, months, or maybe even years. But at the end of the day, if you stick to the process, you will feel better at some point. And with that said, it's about time for me to get into the tweets, because I have definitely eaten into some time. So on to our very first tweet of this episode. Now, this isn't even much of a tweet as it is an article that was posted up on Twitter. And the article regards the comedian Eric Omondi, who encouraged men to marry women who are half their age, saying, and I quote, "It's a critical factor." So I'm just going to read the article, or at least the mini article itself. So it says, and I quote, "Brother, don't ever marry a woman in your age bracket. It is dead on arrival. If you're 31 and you're marrying a woman who's also 31, comedian Eric Omondi has advised. He said marriages of elderly people like grandparents and parents rarely experience divorce because of the said age factor. He continued to say, and I quote, "Women mature faster than men. I would highly recommend that you marry a woman half your age or at least a quarter of your age." End quote. Eric added. A few days ago, Eric Omondi's bae, Lynn, said she met Eric Omondi in 2020 when she was 19 years old. Lynn will be turning 23 in March 2024, while Eric Omondi is in his early 40s. End quote. Alright, so now that I've mentioned this entire caption, I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, and I'm not going to start by refuting whatever's been said. I actually want to see if it's actually workable. If I was to follow his advice, like, you're telling me that if I was, say, 60 years old preparing to retire, that the potential options in terms of women my age bracket to marry, if I was to follow his advice, are either between the age of 30 years old and going all the way till 15 years old. 15. does this nigga know math? I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, because I don't know, maybe the people who are also reading this probably didn't take the quarter part too seriously, or maybe they don't know math. Does this nigga know that a quarter of 60 is 15? So technically, the 60-year-old would be a pedophile, or some version of a pedophile. Like, how the hell does a nigga say this and just go away scot-free? Like, first of all, this technically means that if I'm to start dating, the very, very youngest I could start trying to date the babe is at 36 years old. As a man, you're telling me between the ages of, say, 18, 19, 20, okay, say working class level, 22, 23, all the way till 36, I am not supposed to try and settle down with anyone because I need to wait for the best potential time to get a woman who's half my age. Do you know how dumb that statement sounds? Like, this in and of itself is the pinnacle of stupidity, and I am even willing to fix up his math because using a quarter doesn't work. Maybe he meant 3/4, because if you were 60 years old, then that means it's a 45-year-old, which is a little bit more attainable and plausible. And if you were 36 years old, say, you'd probably be dealing with someone who's 27. It makes a lot more sense, right? Like, that one carries a lot more water than, say, half the person's age, because if you're going to be dating anyone and you're under the age of 36 years old, you technically be going for a teenager. But, to kind of leave most of that shit aside, he also mentioned how marriages of elderly people, like the grandparents and our parents of today, rarely experience divorce because of the said age factor. And that statement is about as far from true as a 60-year-old is from a 15-year-old in terms of a good dating partner. Like, a good chunk of the reason why a lot of the elderly people didn't do divorce or don't do divorce isn't even based on age. Actually, most Gen Xers married within their age ranges. Hell, even people from like way back in the day would marry not too far from their age ranges with the first wife. Maybe you talk about, the later wives, say the guy's like super wealthy and he's like 60 years old and he's marrying the 13, 14, 15-year-old girl who's like the most beautiful in the village. Then at that point, you can say the whole age factor, can kind of come into the mix. But for the most part, like, they didn't have massive age brackets like this for most people who got into relationships. The reason why they didn't divorce is because, one, most of those issues that cause separations and divorces would be things that would be sorted out by the family. So both sides of the family, so the man's side, the woman's side, all the in-laws come together and they sort that shit out. And the second reason is divorce was rarely ever an option for people back in the day. Like, you think about it, people rarely ever spoke of divorce in like the cultural understandings and in a lot of the cultural stories. If ever, it was very, very rare, and it must have been for a very dire reason. Like, for the most part, if it's not being sorted out by the family and, the elders aren't being involved and fines aren't being paid or some shit like that relationship was coming together. Third reason was people weren't getting married for love. People were getting married so that they could continue the bloodline and, have kids and ensure the continuance of the community through having another generation of offspring. Today, we have none of that shit because a lot of people will get issues and they'll choose to separate. A lot of people see divorce as a very quick option, especially considering that some people's friends as well as social media will notice certain problems and the next thing they'll say is leave him, sis. And the choice to have kids is entirely on an individual level nowadays, and people just choose to not have kids because they don't think of it as, a communal growth thing. So all in all, this nigga's being a bunch of bullshit, and I just felt like I had to point that out before I move on to the next tweet. So with that said, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our next tweet of this episode. Now, the tweet I have here is actually a reply to another tweet, so I'm just gonna read the original tweet, which says, and I quote, "Shorty comes into your life, changes your lifestyle on your bills, makes you live beyond your means, forces you to do what she wants, then loses interest in you because you don't appeal to her anymore. Leaves you with a dent on your finances." End quote. Now, the reply to this tweet was, and I quote, "It's called betatization by 1,000 concessions. A shit test is a must. If you fail, you are left." End quote. Okay, now, to kind of give a little bit more context, because at least the guy sort of tried to provide some context, all of this was in regards to an actor who recently got left by his wife, and the allegations that have been pushed by a couple of sites online is that she left him because of his financial issues. And to be honest, I honestly can't speak too much about that. I could go into the whole thing of how, being in financial distress can actually affect someone's personality and can change who they are as a person. And, I could get into all that, and that's all fine and dandy. But for the sake of time, what I'll probably say is, if you feel as a guy, if you feel like you have to live beyond your means to be with your partner, then maybe you shouldn't be with your partner. I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but I believe that if you're with a woman who actually loves you, they probably wouldn't want you getting into financial distress just to be with them. And not unless if they're chipping in, they'd probably tell you to dial down on the spending. Just mostly because if you're financially fucked and she wants to spend the rest of her life with you, or she wants to be with you at least for a considerable amount of time, then it'll affect your relationship and it'll affect her well-being as well. So for her to make you spend a lot of money, that's not exactly what would be considered smart. Then also, because I feel like Kenyan guys should be told this, or maybe it's Nairobi guys, or maybe it's just guys in general, I think we should start being more open with our financial situations with our partners, at least to some degree, especially when it comes to spending. Because there's a lot of guys that aren't confident enough to tell their partner, look, I don't have money, or this isn't within my budget, or this is stretching me a little too much, whenever it comes to handling certain bills, going for certain events, experiencing certain things, all because the babe said that they wanted the two of you to do it together, and you couldn't tell her no because you were broke, because you probably want to do the same thing, but you don't feel open enough to tell them that, and you just suck it up, and then you go there and you're busy trying to take some sort of small loan to cover the whole cost of everything. And yet the reality of it is you're actually quite broke, or you're just going way beyond your means. And the unfortunate reality is, not unless if we speak up about such shit, then we're going to continue dealing with these problems, because it's not like the women don't know that men can be in financial distress, and it's not like the women aren't also in those situations. At the end of the day, I'll still go back to the original statement that I said, where I was like, if your woman loves you enough that she'd want to spend some considerable amount of time together with you, she probably wouldn't want you overspending and messing yourself up financially. So for the most part, I do tend to think that most women, or at least the sensible ones, wouldn't want you to overspend. But if you have one that's not very sensible and is all about the experience and not the money, then maybe you should reconsider your relationship or try having a sit down and a conversation about finances. Uncomfortable, but very, very necessary. But then again, I might be wrong about this shit. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode, which is a reply. And the original tweet says, and I quote, "Read somewhere that girls just give us their contacts not because they're interested, but because they're afraid we would harm them should they refuse. I even stopped asking for numbers after that." End quote. And the reply to that was, and I quote, "And the men are so aggressive you can't even give a fake number because they call it as soon as you give it to them and demand to see the incoming call." End quote. Alright, so up until reading this tweet, I never actually thought about it, but I feel like as guys we need to bring back the talks on how to pick up women. Like, I know it feels like it's such an old thing that us guys used to do way back in the day when like pickup artistry was like a thing, but honestly I feel like we need to bring it back. Mostly because I think a lot of people forget that there's a very fine line between being persuasive and being aggressive. Or to at least try and give it a little bit more specificity, the difference between persevering persuasion and just forcing issues. Because there's a lot of guys that seem to not know the difference today, and that's affecting how they're approaching women and how they may be perceived as some sort of a predator, yet they probably weren't even all about that. Because the reality is, there's the dating tactic that guys have used since time immemorial, where the whole mindset around it is you have to pursue her and put in the work and really show your value and make sure you hit on her for a while so that she can really be yours and see that you're really interested in her. And much as that's not the tactic that I use or the mindset that I have, I can respect where it comes from, and I see where its value lies. You know, the whole like putting in work, showing that you actually value the other person isn't a bad thought process to have. It's just that in today's day and age, it's not the most optimal, and a lot of times it can end up having the complete opposite effect from what it is that you wanted to get from the woman. Because in this particular case, you find that because there's a lot of people that don't understand that a big part of hitting on a woman, of trying to pick up someone, is actually body language. You find that someone goes and is just all up aggressive, all up just trying to be with this person, trying to get their number, their contacts and shit like that. And at first it can seem like, oh, this person is persuasive, and then it'll move to this person is becoming annoying, to now this person is being annoyingly aggressive. And the moment you get to that point, even though she might have had some sliver of hope of being interested in you, it kind of goes out the window. And at that point in time, like, now it becomes a safety issue for her, because she doesn't know whether her not giving you the number is going to elicit an even worse reaction, because you've just kept on pushing the entire time. Which is why in today's time, the better strategy would actually be just you simply trying to raise her up, and if she expresses that she's not interested, you simply backing off. Because on one end, it shows that at least you're secure enough that you're not trying to be with this woman, like she's the only woman that you have to be with. And you know, you have options, so it's not a big issue for you. And also, it actually shows if she's really interested in you, because if she is interested in you, then she'll probably come back. Like, that shit usually tends to happen. If she's not interested in you, then you'll have at least saved each other quite a lot of time wasted with you trying to, you know, raise her up and raise her up and raise her up. And for the most part, it leaves the both of you particularly satisfied. The last time I tried hitting on a babe and actually getting her contacts, what I ended up doing wasn't even asking for her number. And weirdly enough, I wasn't even thinking too much into it. I just figured, you know what, maybe getting her number might be a little bit harder. So what I did was, I was like, show me your IG. And the moment she showed me her IG on my phone, I followed it, and when I got a chance, I DM'd her, because at the end of the day, I knew if she's not interested, she can leave the DM hanging, she can block me, and you know, we can go our separate ways. But it'll at least kill a lot of that haste when it comes with, oh, please can I get your number? And I've literally just gotten to know her for like an hour. So guys, if you're trying to hit on a babe in today's day and age where there's a lot more women who aren't feeling as safe, just try the approach once. If she refuses, back off and move. If she's interested in you, she will come back. Trust me. And if she's interested in you but she doesn't come back, you will find other options that could be hotter, that could be nicer, that could possibly even treat you better. She is not the end all be all, and for the most part, you probably barely know each other that you guys should be getting that much private information out of each other in the first place. But then again, maybe it's me who hasn't been in the game for a long time, and maybe I could be wrong about a lot of other things, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast and the Breaktime Podcast, respectively. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.